Hello everyone, welcome back to the Analyst for 23rd of December 2023, where we will be trying to understand the most important articles from the Hindu and the Indian Express. Now, looking at the table of contents, we find that the very first article is regarding the parliamentary functioning in India, regarding some recent numbers we find in the newspaper. In the next article, we will be looking at a beautiful history and a summary of how the union territories of India and the states came together. In the next one, we will be looking at a recent statement from the IMF regarding India's debt outlook and also the Ministry of Finance response to the same. In the next one, we will be looking at an Indian Express article regarding sovereign credit rating, which will be talking about how the sovereign credit rating of the various nations are calculated. And finally, we will be wrapping up the session with a recent scheme by Indian government that is known as Palna initiative, and this is related to the Creche Scheme for women. Now the very first article is regarding the functioning of the Indian Parliament in India, and here we in the winter session which concluded recently, we will be looking at some important metrics. These metrics will be important as to determine how productive or how much or how efficient the Parliament of India is actually functioning in the last 2-3 years. Now this is very important because in GS2 we have various questions in mains regarding the functioning of the Parliament and the various issues and challenges arising out of that. So let us analyze these particular event in great detail. Now, before beginning, I want to tell you that Parliament for any democracy is very crucial. Why? Because it is the place where the representatives of the people, that is the members of Parliament in India, they sit together, they deliberate on issues of the day, they formulate policies, and finally they also frame regulations and laws. That is crucial for maintaining order and stability in the nation. And this order and stability is very crucial. Why? Because it ensures the amount of social cohesion in the society. It amounts how the economic growth of the nation will be going forward in the next 10 to 20 years, that the Indian government is trying to usher in the objective of developing India or becoming a developed country by 2047 in its Amrit Kal. So it is very important that the Parliament of the day functions properly. Now, when I talk about functioning of the Parliament, what is it all about? See, the very first thing, which is the most important thing that I already talked, is it is the symbol of the people, right? It is symbol of the people. That means our representatives that we send via elections to the state legislature assemblies, to the Parliament of India at the central level, they are our own people, and we send them. Why? Because sometimes in a democracy and in a populous country like ours, which is around 1.4 billion people strong, it is not possible for us common citizens to sit together and frame laws and regulations and debate and discuss over crucial matters. And that is why we send some selected individuals with strong leadership capabilities, with strong social skills, that they will be able to take decisions for ourselves at the central level and also at the state level. And that is why they are actually our own voice. And it is important that our own voice, our own aspirations, our own issues that we face on a day-to-day basis, they must be reflected in the Parliament. In the next one, we find that the primary function of the Parliament or any assembly that frames legislature, right, is that they enact laws. And those laws are generally in India, when we are talking about Parliament, they frame laws on the subjects which are in the union list and the concurrent list. So these are the issues which are important, or the dimensions or the subjects which are important at the national level and also at the state level and also at the regional level. Next, we find that Parliament is also responsible for the oversight of the government. You must have heard that the executive is responsible to the Parliament. How? Because the executive is consisting of what? Prime Minister at the head of Council of Ministers, and among the Council of Ministers we find there are some members who are also ministers of state, and they represents various ministries such as Ministry of Agriculture, Information Technology and so on. These ministries are essential for the functioning of the day-to-day executive tasks of the government. And finally, where are all they responsible to? To the parliament. They have to be accountable to the parliament because they have to respect the majority. And that is why their entire functioning, their entire scrutiny will be done by the parliament through various tools and through various motions, such as we have in India question hours, 0 hour, debates on important issues, and also we have no confidence motion and various other motions that hold the accountability of the executive that is right now say in power in the government. Next, Parliament is also responsible for the passing of the annual financial statement under Article 112, which is essentially popularly also known as the budget. So whatever should be the government expenditure, right, whatever should be the main expenditure from the people's own tax collections, so that is finally responsible, right, under the parliamentary oversight, because the budget has to be finally passed by the parliament once in a year, and that is why we have to understand it is also one of the important functions. Next, Parliament is also a forum for debate and discussion because all of the issues of the day, the recent controversies, they are debated in the Parliament, and it also indirectly and directly holds the government responsible for say the law and order situation, the internal security aspirations and the various developmental agenda of the economy too. So that is why we have to understand functioning of the Parliament is a very crucial thing. And here there are some issues and challenges as of late, and that is how we will be looking at some important data. And these data, the source is PRS 2023 research data. And whenever you are writing mains answers, please always mention the sources. See, the very first challenges is the disruption and the adjournments that we day to day see while the parliaments are in session, right? We understand that there are many members of parliament who have many aspirations and debates, and often they take a uneven turn. They turn into creating rackers and undisciplinary behavior, and that also leads to disruptions, and sometimes even the chairman and the speaker, they also adjourn the house. Then there is also a lack of substantive debate. Mostly the debates which go on in the parliament are politically motivated, and mostly the debates are cornered or targeted at some political party or the other. So the quality of the debate suffers in this matter. And let me tell you, in argumentative Indian, right, Amartya Sen talked about the importance of arguments in human behavior, and particularly Indians. He quotes that since the time of Mahabharata, when Arjuna was in a very crucial debate and discussion rather with Lord Krishna, Amartya Sen sums up that it was a very fine argument, and the quality of the argument is very important, and that is why we must understand any debate is important. But yes, the quality of the debate matters, the intentions of the debate also matters here. Next, we find that the hours spent on legislative business, right, the productivity in the parliament, as you can see, the data starts from 2019, right, budget session, and concludes with the winter session recently 2023 in across all the graphs here. We can understand that the hours spent on legislative business, right, is very less, as you can see, right. It ranges from around an average of 10 to 20 hours in a particular session. That is very low. As you can see, the productivity in the parliament, right, which is generally referred to the share of scheduled time spent functioning, say in motions, discussing bills, debates and so on, that is also not reflecting a very healthy trend, as you can see from this particular diagram. These particular graphs are also present in the handouts. Also, if you can pause and zoom the video to zoom into the figures respectively and select some only recent figures. Not all of the figures are important here. It is just important for you to look at the trend here. So you can see the trend is very low, and also the bills which are introduced and passed, for example, a bill that can be introduced on day 1 and just pass 2 days after, this reflects that the gap of 2 days which was given to the bill for discussion, debate and various other procedures was too less, so that the other opposition parties and other opposition members did not have the proper time to debate on the same and propose changes to it. So it reflects that there is a kind of a dominant force in the house or in the parliament altogether that ensures that the bills pass through without much discussion, and that is also reflecting of the dominance of government agenda. Next, we find that there are some sections in the parliament, either they are not entirely represented, such as say economically backward castes, then women, either they are not properly reflected in the representation of say particular committees, say particular discussions, either or they are not also important, or say their voices are also not raised in various debates. So this is also a cause of concern. Then the MPs and the various other members, right, which propose legislations, they often do not have proper research staff, because to bring a new bill, to bring a new policy, particularly for private members, right, who do not belong to the majority party or say the party in force, they need proper research assistance, infrastructure and so on, and also funds which are also not there. Next, we find finally that all of these cumulatively, they also erode the parliamentary decorum, and that is why we find that going forward we must be taking some steps. The very step is to step up the role of the parliamentary committees, because the parliamentary committees are responsible for scrutinizing the bills, for more in-depth analysis of the bills, discussions and debates. So let us refer more and more bills to the select committees, parliamentary committees and so on, so that they scrutinize the bills and they ensure proper representation of all voices within. Next, in one of the recent statements, a Chief Justice of India said that there is a paucity of intellectuals and attorneys in the law-making procedure of the parliament. It reflects that sometimes there are some laws which are introduced, right, and they have various loopholes and they have various issues for which later there were some amendments requirement that were made later, and this reflects that there is no proper amount of oversight or say proper consultation on legal matters with regard to bills. Then recently we found that if we combine both the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha, we are getting more than 100 plus suspensions of MPs from the house. Mostly it has been alleged by the critics that they were from the opposition parties, and also there is a rise of a trend of expulsions from the house too. Recently, a prominent member of the parliament was expelled from the Lok Sabha on grounds of various charges of ethical misconduct. But while we are not concerned right now about the ethical misconduct or not, but there are some rising cases of expulsions too. And this is threatening the quality of debates too, because if the MPs and the MLAs also in the state legislative assemblies, if they are afraid of being suspended or expelled, will they be able to debate properly? Next, there is a need for right now to have a properly dedicated committee on legislation, which is not there right now. They will be looking into the functioning, the various legislative aspect of the house, and there is a very call for the same. And finally, we can also adopt a very healthy practice from the United Kingdom's functioning of the parliament. That is, in the United Kingdom, they have something known as the shadow cabinet, where the opposition leader acts as the prime minister, their party members and various influential senior leaders, they act as the council of minister. But you may ask me that they are from the opposition party. There is always an existing prime minister and their her own council of ministers, how can they become an additional one? They are not an additional one, they are just a shadow prime minister and a shadow council of ministers. Together they are known as the shadow cabinet. They just mirror the best practices that must be followed by the ruling dispensation of the day. That means in the house itself they operate and they propose alternative policies, they propose alternative decisions and discussions for the same. This is a very healthy trend that Indian parliamentary conventions should also adopt. In the next one, we will be looking at the idea of union territories because a beautiful research article has been published by the Indian Express on their website. And that is why I also encourage the students, whenever they find some important articles on their website of both the Hindu and the Indian Express, you should definitely read through it. Firstly, because it is very important for your GS1, where we have the post-independence consolidation of the entire Indian region. And also for prelims, we find that lately there have been a trend of asking some questions indirectly on post-independence India. So that is why we must be looking at this particular matter very seriously. Now, let me walk you through the structure of the Indian states that were prevalent before and at India's independence in 1947. We find that there were three types of government. One, the Governor General and the Executive Council. Second, there was this Lieutenant Governor, and third, there was this Chief Commissioner, right? And the areas under Governor and Executive Council were major provinces, right, like Bombay, Madras, Bengal and so on. The structure of this particular is that the Governor would be heading it and the Executive Council members will be assisting and advising the Governor General. And we can understand the provincial territories were having significant autonomy in policy formation and also in various economic and developmental aspirations too. And its relation with the center is that it was a subordinate relation. That means that the governor was responsible to the Governor General, right, and with a considerable leeway in internal decision making. So it was having a respectable autonomy, but not too much, as we can see in the Indian states right now. After that, we find the Lieutenant Governor with smaller strategically areas such as say United Provinces of Agra, Oudh and so on, and they were headed by a Lieutenant Governor reporting directly to the Governor General, right? And here there were no Executive Council. Next, we find that the Chief Commissioner provinces are areas from say the Assam and Coorg and also Delhi in 1911 when it became the capital of India. And here it was headed by the Chief Commissioner, and he was the person who was directly responsible to the central government. There were no councils or advisory boards here. Here we can understand that the Chief Commissioner areas were under direct control of the center, that means of the Governor General. But here if we find the Lieutenant Governor areas, they were not say fully autonomous as like the states here, but they were also kept close in contact with the central government. Now this was the structure which was prevalent at Indian independence, and with the adoption of the Constitution of India, constitutionally in at independence, India had Part A, B, C, D states. Part A states were the governor states such as the states of Bombay and Madras that we discussed, as also you can see from here that these are the Part A states. Part B states were having elected legislature. Part C states were having Chief Commissioner. Part D states where the central government was there and there were no local legislatures. That means in Part C states and Part B states and Part A states, there were some legislations. And when we talk about legislature bodies, we mean that these legislatures were elected by the government. And that is why we find that these states, this was a classification which was prevalent in the very beginning. And later we would find that these state system would be, or say this part system would be later annulled, and a totally new system will be established, but that is for the later slides here. And here we find that earlier the part C plus D were under the Scheduled District Act of 1874, and these were actually the areas where generally no central law or state laws would apply. Why? Because part C and part D under the British times, especially the Andaman Nicobar Islands, or say the Minicoy, which is right now under the Lakshadweep Islands, they were dominated by tribal sections, and that is why the government, the British government then felt that there would be no general laws which will be applying to these particular areas, areas, and that is why it was kept outside the jurisdiction of legislatures. And here from 1911 we also find that Delhi was also converted into a chief commissioner's province because the capital shifted back then. And when we are talking about Indian states after independence, we need to look at the debates that went into the drafting of the new constitution. That is, what was actually the debate that went into bringing this particular system. The very first debate, where some part C and part D states, like say Coorg and Delhi, which are having a substantial amount of population, and that is why to represent them democratically there should be a legislative bodies, right? But there were some islands like Andaman Nicobar Islands, then Lakshadweep Islands, which are sparsely populated, but also they are geographically strategic because they are island nations and they are located on the Indian Ocean region. So that is why they were kind of strategic also. And also another important factor was these were the areas dominated by the tribal sections, and for protection of their culture, tradition, we need to adopt some central initiatives, or say central control, because they would not have enough resources of themselves to run themselves. That is why the central fund, central guidance would be important for them. So this was the main debate which was going on, whether to convert these areas into state governments or not. And also there were various other debates over the union territories, right? There were debates that whether we should be converting these, say, part C and D states into UTs or keeping them as state governments, giving them full autonomy. But again we find that these particular areas, or say chief commissioners areas, as we can find here, right, as we can find here in this map, these areas are very far from each other. If you can see, the Delhi was under chief commissioner area, like Lakshadweep Islands, Andaman Islands, right, they are very far from each other, and the coordination will be very difficult in this matter. And these are very small areas too, they would not have enough economic financial resources to run themselves. And finally, after enough deliberation and discussion, the government of the Part C States Act was passed in 1951, where we find that the various provisions of Part C were enshrined. And for prelims, you need to look at these specific small details only. Now we need to turn our attention to a very important dimension which led to the evolution of the modern India states, that had its roots that started from 1948, just after independence, over the language debate. Now, since, or say before independence only, the INC, the Congress, right, the Indian National Congress, which fought for India's independence and debated with the British on various issues, they, in their own campaigns after independence, they told in various say public meetings that Indian say that free India, independent India would have states based on linguistics, or say based on language. But at independence or after independence, the various states which were promised these were not getting the same aspirations, or say same assurances from the government of the day. Specifically because back then the first Prime Minister of India, Jawaharlal Nehru, he was not very excited over the fact that India would be divided on the basis of language. because he believed in unity of the nation, and he believed that dividing India based on language would be counterintuitive to national integrity and unity. And that is why we find that over the next 2-3 years, even after independence, the strict division of states on the basis of language was not accepted by the center. But the demands for separate political units, or say demand for separate states based on language, did not cease to exist, because we find the Kannada speakers in Madras, Mysore, Bombay, Hyderabad, they wanted to frame a different state of their own based on language. Then there were these Marathi speakers and Malayalam speakers who wanted a state of their own. Then there was this Maha-Gujarat movement, which also looked at their own linguistic interests. Then finally, the movement for the separate state of Andhra Pradesh was finally the final blow to the ruling government back then. And that is when Nehru realized that it was no longer sustainable to contain this movement anymore, to contain this unrest over national language, or say over linguistic language, regional language, and the demand for separate states could not be controlled anymore. And also, in a very famous book, you must know that in India after Gandhi, and please, those of you who are watching intently, do let me know who is the author of this book. In India after Gandhi, Jawaharlal Nehru's contemplations were said that Nehru did not want that India should be divided on this particular basis. But finally, when these protests, these movements were not, say, controllable, he had to coalesce to their demands. And for that, Nehru constituted a States Reorganization Commission, SRC, which was under Justice Fazil Ali, K.M. Panikkar and H.N. Kunzru. I tell that all of these names are very important, because in prelims, sometimes UPSC do ask some names which are quite unconventional too, which you have probably never heard of. So whenever you hear these names, do associate it with the State Reorganization Commission. What is this commission all about? This commission was formed by the government back then to look into the demands of the various regions in India that are asking for a separate political unit and give a solution to the same. And for that matter, this commission totally comprehensively looked at the various demands. They individually went and including all the officers, they went to the states, they asked the people, they talked with the political leaders, and finally they came with their suggestion in 1955, which was formally and informally also accepted by the government, that 14 states of India should be formed, and they should be based on linguistic lines to particularly settle the debate forever. And also, for the very first time in say policy wordings, or say in official letters, you can say the term union territories were used. For the very first time, term union territory was used, and they included in that particular recommendation of SRC Andaman Nicobar Islands, the Lakadiv, Minicoy and Amandivi Islands, which we collectively know as the Lakshadweep Islands. Then we had Delhi, Manipur, Tripura, Himachal Pradesh. You may ask me ki Manipur, Tripura, Himachal Pradesh, they are all states right now. But at the time of independence, these areas were particularly very less developed. And one of the very important recommendation of State Reorganization Commission was that not only it will be looking at the demand of the states on linguistic levels, it will be also looking at the various administrative incapabilities of some political units such as Manipur, Tripura, Himachal Pradesh, their own capability to generate funds, resources, economic opportunities for the people, because these states, Himachal Pradesh, Tripura, Manipur and also Andaman Nicobar Islands, they were primarily not developed as good as the rest of India. And that is why the commission recommended that the central government should be giving funds, should be helping these states, these union territories first, and later they can become states if they become developed enough. As we can see right now, they are states because they were able to develop themselves. And that is why we can see this is a very interesting piece of history. We find that the character and evolution of the UTs in the very beginning in this SRC, that it was very, the various union territories which are proposed here, they were not having similar characteristics. All these names here, they were having different characteristics, right? And also, after the linguistic reorganization, we can see, it is very, very important for prelims, mind it. Let me write here also, that the states which are marked in yellow, if you can see, the states which are marked in yellow, you can see here, right? These are the states which still retains its geographical integrity as of now. And again, I ask all of you to mention the names of these states which are highlighted here. You can pause the video and let me know, but in the comment section, give me the names of those states in yellow which had the same boundaries since the 1956 reorganization, right? Okay, now these union territories had very little homogeneity and they were spread across the country, right? They were spread across the country and were considered generally in the beginning backward or tribal. I told you, right, that the rationale of the SRC in listing these UTs for the very first time were based on some grounds such as low economic development, tribal areas and so on. But they had very little commonalities between them. They were either very far away, the culture and language were very different between these UTs also, and also these regions were generally not ready to become a part of another state also. For example, say, Himachal Pradesh was not say eager to join say Uttar Pradesh, right? So because they had their own linguistic and cultural traditions which is very distinct from the nearby states. So there was very little homogeneity between these regions too. Now we are talking about the birth of the Union Territory, specifically after we find the very first time which was the term which was used in the Fazl Ali Commission, the SRC Commission. The SRC considered that the Part A states were the standard of equality and freedom. The Part A states were the provinces, provinces of Bengal, Bombay, which would later become the states, right? The SRC observed that the autonomy, the political connectivity, the economic connectivity and development, which was, and also the level of law and order institutions, say the presence of high courts in these particular areas, the proper political structure, assemblies and everything. At the time of independence, the SRC lauded these states and say that all of the states in India should become like these states first, and then they can demand statehood, right? They should not say that right now we are kept as union territories such as Himachal Pradesh and so on. They should be the standard, golden standard of states, and that is why the commission recommended that Part A state should be kept and Part B and C states should be completely abolished, and that is what it was done. So generally what remains right now are Part A states and D states. If you can see, these states were what? Only the central government would be in power, right? Or the central government would be in control. But here the characteristic is that some UTs can have a state legislature due to its substantial population and so on. Some will not be having. So we no longer tell them as Part A and Part D states. We just know them right now as states and union territories. Part C states reflected a number of problems, as I told you earlier also. They were far from each other, they were not in uniform administratively, they had specific purposes like economic development which would continue to depend on the center such as Himachal Pradesh, Kutch, Tripura. There are also some countries in the world right now such as the USA, which is a federal nation, right? We know USA is a federal nation, but there are some regions in USA such as the Washington DC, which is controlled by the center. Just as in India we have Delhi, which is an UT. We can say that same about the Washington DC in the USA, and in the case of Australia we have the same with Canberra, which is centrally administered province or say area. So this is not the only case of India, as this is also that the same thing we can also see in the rest of the world. So finally, the government of the day, they decided to go on with this particular organization where we have various states and the union territories, which were centrally administered via representatives of the center. Generally, in our case, it is the lieutenant governor, right? And also the various, officials which are generally appointed by the Indian government. Now, finally, we find that the Constitution 7th Amendment Act of 1956 was passed, and here the territories were declared to be union territories. Let me just give you briefly the basic evolution of these union territories. Himachal Pradesh and Tripura joined the list of union territories along with Delhi, Manipur, Andaman, Nicobar Islands and Lakshadweep Islands. Later we would find that Himachal Pradesh, Tripura, they would become states, right? Later we also would find that Chandigarh, which was in a political tussle between the Haryana and the Punjab states, finally the city of Chandigarh would become an UT in 1966 out of a compromise agreement by both the states to establish Chandigarh as the capital of both the states. Then it would become an union territory. Then we would find that the French territories, when the French surrendered its territories to the center government, generally most of the territories were consolidated and they were renamed as Pondicherry, right now known as Puducherry, which included Karaikal, Yanam and Mahe, which are very, very far away from each other, let me tell you. And also, there is a special case of Chandannagore in West Bengal, where the French surrendered the territories and Chandannagore joined the state of West Bengal. This is the exception where an union territory was merged into the state, right? Let me tell you, Chandigarh was not merged. It became the capital of two states. But Chandannagore, which was the French establishment, they became a part of the West Bengal. Then the Portuguese territories, after Portugal surrendered Goa, Dandanagar Haveli and all the territories it had in India, it became a part of Indian province of Indian polity in 1961. And the state of Goa, the union territory of Goa back then, it became very prosperous and it was very well developed, and that is why in 1987 statehood was given to Goa, retaining the rest of the union territories, rest of the regions as union territories only. In 2019, the government merged the Dandra Nagar Haveli with Daman and Diu. They are also very far from each other. And finally, in 2019, we find that Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh, they were separately designated as union territories. And if you find that the orange fonts, orange letters here are all different union territories. So this was a very interesting idea of how they came to be evolved. Now in the next one, we will be looking at IMF debt outlook, because recently IMF warned the government of India that government's debt can hit 100% of GDP. Or if India is generating 100 rupees in 2023, the debt would also receive 100. That means that it is warning India that your GDP can be totally a debt-led GDP by 2027-28 under adverse circumstances. This is very important because the IMF told that under adverse circumstances or very, very serious cases such as economic recessions, such as another once in a lifetime experience such as the COVID pandemic, under that situation it can hit 100%. So this is very important to discuss under GS3 of government budgeting. Now, starting with the very basics as usual, I want to discuss what is public debt is all about. See, public debt is also known as government debt. It refers to the total money that the government owes to its lenders. Because for the functioning of the government, we know that generally the government spends more, it earns. It earns how? Through taxations and various non-tax revenues too. But it is an expenditure of the government on say defense, subsidies, education and so on. also to pay the salaries of the future bureaucrats who are watching these videos, right? Your all salaries will also be paid by the government of the day, and these all expenditures. And government, let me tell you, is a welfare state. Also, according to the DPSP provisions, we know that any government is a welfare state, and that is why generally government have more expenditure than its revenue, and that is why government needs to lend sometimes, right? This is a very, very important fact that you must understand, that the government must lend. How it lends and who are its lenders? Individuals like you and me who can purchase government bonds or treasury bills, we know, right? Then students, we also must understand that there are financial institutions such as banks, investment firms which also purchase government bonds or lends to the government in case of crisis. Then there are also foreign governments such as US, such as international organizations such as the World Bank who lends to India, sometimes in cases of say requirements. Then government generally needs money to say finance its deficits, make more investments, say make investments on what? Roads, airports, schools, colleges. Deficits is generally a term when we understand expenditure is more than revenue. So where will the money come from? From lenders. And also to respond to emergencies such as health crisis, such as the COVID pandemic, when typically the entire economy shut down and generally the tax collection is very less, so the government have to borrow money. Now here, after understanding, we can understand there are some implications of public debt too. Now, the implication can be understood from benefit or drawback. See, increased investment is always beneficial because it leads to better infrastructure, education and everything. It is good for the economy in the long run. Then, emergency relief is also beneficial, such as it can provide during COVID crisis various subsidies and schemes which are generally social safety nets and other critical services. These are generally good also in the short term and also in the long term, ensuring people's livelihoods. Economic stimulus, whenever it is given, it is also beneficial, but it is strictly short term, because economic stimulus can be said to stimulate the economy if it is facing a recession, right? It is good for the economy, right, in the short term only. Then we find whatever loans that the government is taking, don't you think that the government should be paying back the principal amount, but also it must also do an interest payments. But interest payment is a drawback on the economy. Why? Because the government have to continuously pay the interest over and over a period of time, right? And that is putting pressure on the next generations, which is not good for the inter and intra-generational equity. Next, we find that fiscal flexibility is also suffering, because due to more and more debt, it can lead to more and more deficit and more targets for the government to meet the deficit, and new investments would suffer. And another final impact is on economic instability if the debt is too high. If the debt is too high, such as IMF is telling, if India can be in cases of unfortunate events, that if it reaches to 100% of the GDP, that means the entire GDP is financed by debt. It is not a good thing then. And here let us understand India's debt scenario and its trend, because it can be important for your mains and also prelims. If we start from 1980s onwards, we find that there was an external debt accumulation before 1990s, and that is why we find the 1991 crisis were actually one of the reasons for that was the accumulation of external debt that India took. After that, after when IMF intervened and gave various benefits and schemes, the debt reduced. But as of now, we find, if we compare the recent years, during the COVID crisis, the debt also increased, because I told government did not have enough revenue to earn from the taxes, and government generally have to spend more in term situations. So this was the overall trend. We find that there are various state governments such as Punjab, Rajasthan, Bihar, Kerala and West Bengal, which are the top 5 states which have most outstanding debts to their state gross domestic product. Then we also find that the center's interest payments and their liabilities are also increasing. These are some important data points that you must be referring to. Then we find that the burden of debt in India is more of an internal in nature. That means whatever the Indian government has taken loans from, it is generally from the internal individuals, internal banks and so on. And we find that the external debt is very, very small, as we can see here. As we can see, the percentage share as of the data that is available up to December 2022, the internal component of debt is 93%, which is good, as it is also being said that public debt is largely rupee denominated or internal debt. Because if we hold more debt in dollars, say in pounds or say in yuan, in other internal currencies, those currencies, if they fluctuate, they can have impact in India. So it is good that we have large amount of debt in India's rupees itself. And recently we find this particular development from IMF is very interesting. See, in IMF, this you should remember for prelims, according to Article 4 of IMF's Articles of Agreement, we find that bilateral discussions with members take place every year. And generally, an agent from the IMF come to the particular members, they held discussions on various metrics of economic growth and financial status of the nation, and they give report to the IMF. And that is what the recent report came out, that under adverse situation, India's debt can be around 100% of the GDP. But here the Ministry of Finance countered it. It countered that the general debt, government debt dipped steeply in the last years. It was 88% around in 2020-21, as I also showed in the previous figures, and right now it decreased to 81% in the last financial year. So this is a good sign. And also Ministry of Finance pointed out that IMF told this about one extreme possibility, such as the occurrence of a pandemic which would shut down the entire world. This 100% figure is for extreme situations, not for usual situations, right? And those extreme situations for US, UK, China are 160, 140, 200% respectively. So India at 100% in extreme situations by 2028, if any situation occurs, is a better sign than these countries at all, right? And the IMF report also said that under favorable circumstances, if the government is taking good steps, the debt to GDP ratio may decline to below 70%, which is a good figure. And the Ministry of Finance also said that right now we are facing various economic shocks which India also recovered from, such as the global financial crisis that took place in 2008-09, the COVID crisis, the Russia-Ukraine war, and various other conflicts such as the Israel-Palestine conflict, and which are going on right now. So India leveraged and fought. As also we can see, there is a global rise in public debt. So India is not an exception. We can find Japan, US, UK, Brazil, in the entire Euro area, they are having debt levels which are very high. Now, there are some measures needed. Obviously, when the IMF is talking about debt levels and Indian government, we also need to talk about some measures which are needed. First, we find that the government has something known as Public Debt Management Cell, which gives advisory functions to the central government on what? How to plan borrowings or how to take loans from various lenders, how to manage liabilities such as, the various funds, right? Social security funds, the various deposits of PFs, postal offices that central banks have, or say the central government have of the public. Then how to manage matters related to external debt, and also how to invest and also do in capital market operations. So these are all the things that this particular cell is doing. And there is also a suggestion that Public Debt Management Agency should be made a statutory body, which is not as of now, because statutory body gives it more powers. Next, there should be more fiscal buffers. Fiscal buffer means that there should be resources by the government to say more and more savings by the government when the economy is performing good, so they can use the savings during recessions. This can be done by using more and more financial assets, such as the government of Singapore. It invests funds in reserves, it invests in sovereign wealth funds, and it also is very, very important for India to follow the same. Then India must also have fiscal space, such as run budget deficit without increasing debt burden. Say government should run its budget deficit but not take more and more debt, because more debt adds to more debt and interest payments. Finally, it is also should look at contingency plans in case of economic risks such as recession or natural disasters. India should also look at some contingency or emergency funds, should set up some funds. It also has the contingency fund of India that looks into the same. And finally, there is a call for setting a fiscal council, just like the financial commission, finance commission, which will look at the debt level and managing the debt from a constitutional angle, which is not there, and there is a call to set it up. And also there is a final call to amend the FRBM Act, because FRBM Act was highly inefficient, because more often we have seen that targets were shifted, goalposts were shifted. So we must be adhering to the FRBM Act too. In the next one, we will be looking at sovereign credit rating, and here we can find recently the government has criticized the opaque methodologies used by major global credit rating agencies in India. And that is why we need to look at what are sovereign credit ratings. Very important for our economics in paper 1 of prelims. See, what is a credit rating? Say you are taking a loan. How will the bank trust that you are repaying the loan properly and you will be not defaulting on your loan? Maybe the bank will be asking for a collateral or a security deposit for the loan amount that you are going to ask. So this is the one way that the banks can trust you. The second way that the banks can trust you is looking at your history of previous loans you have taken and repaid back at a proper period of time, right? So it will be looking at time, it will be looking if you are paying the interest, if you are complying with the banks and everything. Similarly, as I told in one of the articles also, that the government needs to borrow money. And who will be evaluating whether the government should be given money or not? They are these credit rating agencies. Globally, we have Standard & Poor's, Fitch, and various other global credit rating agencies which are very prominent, that look at the various aspects as to how the government should be rated, and that is actually known as sovereign credit rating. It is very, very important because the credit worthiness of government is very important, because I told that government needs to take some loans for their various needs, right? And these loans may be dependent on some government initiatives to fund these initiatives, to run these initiatives in a proper manner. And if we can see the Fitch sovereign rating model, it uses various parameters. What parameters? It looks at the governance indicators, gross domestic product, per capita in world GDP. It looks at broad money supply and looks at various other sovereign net reserves, commodity dependence, foreign exchange reserve. Don't worry, you do not need to remember everything. Just remember that these credit ratings have various variables, and this looks at various aspects of the government of the day and where it takes money from and how it repay back the money. After that, it also looks at the performance of the government, and that is where these credit rating agencies arrange countries in various grades. And those grades, if the government is having a good rating, they will be getting good loans not only from the domestic banks but also from the international banks. So a good rating is always good for the domestic government, and also a good rating is also good for the FII investors, because these investors will be looking countries which are safe to invest in. And these ratings, these sovereign ratings, also tell which country is safe to invest in. Now, the last article is regarding the Creche Scheme, because recently the Union Women and Child Development Ministry is aiming to establish 17,000 creches in Anganwadi centers. What are Anganwadi centers? These were conceptualized in 1970s under the Integrated Child Development Services or scheme that looks at the holistic development of the adolescent child from their childbirth to their infant and to their early stages of life. After that, it also looks at the lactating pregnant mothers and also the young mothers too. And here we find that the 2023 Nobel Prize was given to a woman economist who was recognized for her work on the contribution of women, right, in the workforce and also in the overall GDP. She found that the women generally suffers due to what? Due to child bearing burden, that childbearing burden, or when women bears child, they lose around say 6 months of productive time. They, after that, they have to look for the child, because mostly in our still patriarchal society, women do not get any help from their in-laws family or say their husbands, right? The instances are very low, and that is why they also have a lifelong loss of working age, and this loss is very detrimental for their economic progress. And that is why the government of India is saying that let us help you with this, let us reduce this burden. How? Because government is looking at some important metrics, that there are the participation of women in workforce has increased to 37% in 2022, and also the government saw there are many, or say around 14 lakhs of Anganwadi and mini Anganwadi centers in India. So the government say that if I utilize women, if I utilize the Anganwadi centers, I can come with a very innovative initiative. And this is the innovative initiative of maintaining creches. Creches are those day play areas, right? Daycare areas where working women can send their children, right, up to the hours that they work. And till then, the Anganwadi centers will be tending to the children, and there will be other children, the child will be interacting with them, they will also learning and be educated, and this is a good thing for the women too, because they can focus on their works. And this is also a safe and secure environment for the nutritional development, cognitive development of the children. And this will be finally enabling more people to gain more employment opportunities too. So this is where we have to understand these innovative initiatives, these schemes, which is known as Palna scheme, right, is very important right now. So I thank you all for being a very patient audience. I hope you learned a lot in this session. Till again, all the best. Thank you.